I left off saying that we were just about to leave Surabaya. We were transferred to Palembang in Sumatra. And Edie was then 13 months old and walking. But before we left Surabaya, we had one very important and interesting incident. We went with some Chinese friends to the middle of Java to see the famous temple, the Borobudur.
Okay, and Kathleen, you're going to hold up an image, which is on the outside of this.
And on the
photo
way
album.
there, we saw the temple of, this is not the right name of it, and I'd have to look it up on Google again.
But where was this?
This is in South Middle Java, and these were edifices. This is the Borobudur. These temples and the Borobudur were built in the 8th century by the Hindus, because Java was a Hindu country at that time. And then the Muslims moved in and Islam took over. Now these temples were being rebuilt when we saw them, and it was a national project. And when I looked on Google, they had been wonderfully, beautifully rebuilt.
Great.
We were then on our way to Palembang, and when we arrived there, we discovered that the man whom Harry was to replace wasn't ready to leave. So that meant that we had to spend 6 weeks in a pasanggrahan, which is like a paseo in Spain.
Oh, and is that some sort of residence?
No, it's not a residence. It's a sort of a. It's not really a hotel. It's just a. Oh, it is a hotel. We had a room and we could get meals there, and it was called a pasanggrahan.
Okay.
And it was a very, very long, slow, dull 6 weeks. The baby was restive. She had had an ama that she loved very much, a babu, and she missed her babu. And so she and I took long walks, and then we sat in that room together, and we looked at books, and we did different things. And in the meantime, this man whom Harry was going to replace eventually went on a long farewell trip. So he hadn't really moved out of the house. But eventually he moved out of that big company house, one of the big company houses that we eventually moved into. It seems amazing, but I was only there for a very short period of time. I can't remember exactly how long, but it was getting close to the holidays, and my baby had her second birthday, and I wanted to get back to the States and show her off to the grandparents. So I left alone and flew back, and Harry later followed me a few months later.
So this would have been in December of what year?
Edie was 2 years old. That would be 52.
Okay.
But it doesn't. Yeah, it was 52. Harry was. We did meet many very nice people in Palembang, and it was where they had on one side of the Musi River was the town of Palembang, and on the other side was the refinery. And a lot of the company people worked at the refinery. And to get to the refinery, we had to cross the Musi River. And we we took a company launch that left at specified times in a trip of about 20 minutes. And it was a long drive down to the company launch. And we had a driver, and his name was Uden. And Uden drove the company black Chevrolet and was very proud of his position. But nobody had ever taught him to drive. So to start the car, he would start it in drive. And of course the car would sputter and buck and stall. So he'd start it again and do the same thing again, and it would stall. And finally that poor car would get a little gas up. Maybe he'd given it a little more pressure on the accelerator, and the car would eventually lurch forward and finally reach sort of cruising speed, still in drive the whole time, and then he would cruise along at 25 miles an hour, never once changing gears.
So
Never once.
So he wouldn't put the clutch in when he was starting the engine.
No.
Strange.
How did the poor car live? Anyway, that was the story of driving to the Musi River.
And I take it there was no bridge over the river.
No, there was no bridge at all. We had to take the company launch. There may have been bridges up and down the river. I have no idea.
And how long was it? A big river? Was it a?
It was a big river.
Okay.
It was wide. I would say it was as wide as Lake Chelan.
Okay, that's a big river.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
And so that was one episode in Palembang, and meeting friends, and they became good friends for life, and for as long as we knew them there, and then we knew them back in the States, because eventually all the expatriates got transferred back to the States, but that comes a little bit later in the story. As I said, I went home ahead of time with my baby and was very proud of her. And we went back to Indonesia, 1953, January 1953, and our first station was going to be Semarang. And we'd lived there before for a 5 months period. And Semarang hadn't changed at all. It was still a lovely, quiet town, and we still had that lovely house on top of the hill. Except, by then I had Edie,